All right, welcome to Cwic Show. My name is Greg Mattson, and I'm your host. In this episode, we bring back John Hewlett, who's the founder of one of our sponsors, Cardio Miracle. We're actually going to cover a few different topics today, but John, welcome to the show.
Greg, thank you. It's great to be with you. I was just enjoying listening to you and Ralph Hancock, a very long-time friend of mine. I've known him for, 25, 30 years, and admire his work. And I'm grateful for clarions of virtue and wisdom that are out there in the world today, in a world of wokeness and craziness. I really admire people like Professor Hancock and others like him who are standing up for truth, constitutional adherence, and also for gospel principles. So it's a rare find, and he's a great guy.
Yeah. Ralph is an icon there. He's, sometimes I think feels alone because there's not very many other people that speak up the way that he does. And I know there's a lot of people that agree with him there, but, getting out and actually speaking up is something very different. And so that's something I really admire about him. What I want to go into here is something that I rarely ever cover, but I know that you know a lot about this and have some very strong opinions about it.
Definitely.
But I was just recently, this is something I was just happened to see this in my YouTube feed, and I stopped and I watched it, and it was Dave Martin who was addressing the European Union. And I was fascinated with what he was talking about. He was going into the DNA basically and the sequence of the patents of the immunizations that were actually later on given during COVID time, but these things were actually patented well before. And anyway, you know a lot about this. Dave. Tell me a little bit more about your association with him and with what he's doing in his work.
David Martin, I happened to meet about 2 years ago, and I have been intricately involved in his work and his mission. He's a very strong cardio miracle advocate. He takes it, he recommends it. Beside the point, he's probably the most intelligent man I have ever met. And I've met a lot of really smart people. I view myself as a reasonably intelligent, but connect the dots type of person. But David Martin is off the charts, brilliant. And he's a lawyer, he's a doctor, he's a financial genius, he's a guru, he's a techie. He is a man for all seasons. And very interesting. He actually grew up as a part of one of the Amish types of religions. And he was so extraordinary as a child, they thought he was possessed, demonic, and they literally tried to almost beat him to death as a child. He was abused by the leadership of his particular very conservative denomination. And his life story is like something out of a movie that I've spent many, many hours with him multiple times. My wife and I find him so interesting. We just want to fire questions at him because he knows the scriptures, he knows history, he knows geography, he knows science, chemistry. He knows a lot of stuff. Well, his company, I think it was called MCAM, literally filed and archived all the existing patents in the world. And in that effort, and so for like the last 20 years. And so he started seeing some funny things in the patent world. I mean, he taught at the University of Virginia Medical School. And like I said, he's legally trained as well. So he's a very interesting combination. But he started seeing patents showing up from our pharmaceutical companies in the 90s that were talking about things that we've experienced in the last 3 and 4 years. And there's a patent trail, well guarded, but patents are patents, and they're probably the most precise document there is. And he has accumulated the entire patent trail. I mean, things like the protocol testing that we all heard so much about. That test was patented like 15 years ago.
Hmm.
And vaccines or injections, therapies, viruses have been, I don't know, but they patent viruses. And these viruses have been patented. So he has been absolutely at the forefront. And he's been, blacklisted, trying to be silenced. But he is a warrior for.
But why is he blacklisted?
He's blacklisted because he's going against the globalist agenda in his mind and the pharmaceutical agenda of controlling humanity, and even in many cases the reduction that some of these globalists believe that the world is overpopulated, so we should get rid of about half the people so they have a nicer place to live for themselves. I know it sounds conspiratorial to people, but the crazy thing about conspiracies, Greg, in the last 5 years is they no longer are conspiracies, because in usually 3 to 6 months they all come true. Things that we thought would never happen in our country never have happened over and over and over again. And just this last week, our heart is breaking at what in the world happened in Hawaii. What in the world happened in Las Vegas in this mass shooting that all of a sudden we heard about, and then we were told, it was one guy in the window of the Mandalay Bay shooting all these people. Well, that is totally contrary to all the different reports from the ground. But these things get brushed over. Our regulatory bodies come in, they lock down the areas. We're getting texts and messages from people in Lahaina that said the government and regulators, that there were bomb squad people keeping people out of the inner city of Lahaina. They wouldn't let insurance adjusters in. They wouldn't let people in. They wouldn't let, the government was blocking supplies, insulin, medicines getting to the people. I mean, we're getting firsthand reports from people we know over and over and over again about all of the crazy things going on, and how it seems like the government in many, many instances is getting in the way of people, common sense, even having the knowledge. And David Martin's basically saying to people, what we've experienced the last now 3.5 years, there is a clear patent trail going back 20 years that foresaw how this happened. And quotes from the people involved, regulators involved, the scientists involved. I mean, this whole business, he 3 years ago was saying, this didn't come from a bat that was flying around a market in China. Who are you kidding? And so the problem that you have, and let me just tell you, I was a normal guy. I was a normal, moderate Republican and a normal person, grew up in a normal family. I used to talk to my dad and say, well, what do you think of the book None Dare Call It Conspiracy, the John Bircher's Bible? And he goes, oh, that's extremism, blah, blah, blah. And I remember talking to him about Elder Benson at the time, who became President Benson. And he said, well, he and Cleon Skousen and these guys, they're pretty extreme, and they would keep saying that everything's bad. Well, guess what? Who's the most quoted prophet, or was, when we used to have normal lessons in priesthood meeting, was Ezra Taft Benson, because everything he said has come true. I mean, it's come true. And he was shouting from the rooftops, a lone voice, back 30, 40 years ago about these things would happen. And it wasn't like he was making it up. Look at the Book of Mormon. Look at the scriptures. The scriptures foretold all of this. We shouldn't be surprised. We heard that there would be evil people, that there would be a plague over the entire earth, whatever. And you can define those things in different ways. But it's, once I got involved in looking at underneath the rock, it's a tragic, because you keep finding more rocks. And just like in what you've done in helping to bring to the forefront what's going on at the church schools, which I wasn't totally aware of, just like you weren't aware of perhaps what was going on with David Martin and Judy Mikovits, who's the one who Dr. Fauci, they put in prison. They tried to intimidate her. I know Judy Mikovits. I know David Martin. I know these people. I deal with them on a daily basis, because they all take Cardio Miracle. They think Cardio Miracle is the greatest antidote to the problems that we're dealing with. That's their opinion. I can say it's my opinion, but these are really smart people, and they're all advocating it for people to help support their immune system. So I could call them right now on the phone and get them on the phone, all of them. I know them, I listen to them, and then I try to combine that with my gospel understanding of the latter-day trials and perils that we're living in, and try to help make sense of the whole thing in trying to help gather the house of Israel, but keep the house of Israel alive while they're gathering.
Now, David Martin, when I was listening to what he was saying, he started talking about a sequence of events going back to the 60s, in fact, as I recall. And again, I haven't done my research on this because we just happened to be talking about this before I hit the record button. But as I recall, he was talking about going back to the 60s when they started looking into coronavirus, which is, again, for people may have forgotten or didn't know, this is the same thing as the common cold, right? A common cold is a specific type of coronavirus. And what they discovered about the coronavirus is that it could be more easily manipulated and genetically changed than a lot of the other viruses out there.
And duplicated, right.
And so they began to start working on this back in the 60s. And then, as you said, they started to bring out these patents in the 90s. But he's, help me with this, because again, I don't study this a lot. I probably know more than the average person, but I haven't really dug into it. He's basically putting together a trail that states that the pharmaceutical companies have helped manipulate this entire process of events, maybe even COVID itself. And when I mean COVID, I mean the pandemic. And that if you look at all of the events coming up to this, I hope YouTube doesn't ban this, that if you look at the events coming up to this, this was orchestrated, at least orchestrated in case this broke out. Is that right? Is that what David Martin is saying?
He's saying that in spades, and he has the patent and legal documents. He has the quotes. He has the direct experience, the direct conversations with government leaders and leaders in different types of industry that back up every single thing that he's saying. He is a lawyer trained, but with a medical background, and he's a humanitarian, and he's a God-fearing. As I mentioned to you, his genetics are interesting. He is a direct descendant of Judah on one side and Joseph on the other side of his family tree. He is a very, very unique Israelite, so to speak, of the house of Israel. And I believe that he is contributing immensely to illuminating the truth of what's going on. We heard about Gadianton robbers in the scriptures. Why do we not think that that's what we're surrounded by now? I mean, it was foretold, and in his opinion, my opinion, I will sustain, they're everywhere. They've infiltrated everything. And I think that that's why we have to stand firm by our faith and have spiritual experiences while we ferret through the scriptural warnings, the scriptural prophecies in our efforts to be able to prepare for the second coming. I think the second coming is coming like wildfire. I used to preach about that in my gospel doctrine class, much to the chagrin of some of the members, about the second coming. And they said, well, the missionaries haven't been sent home, John. Oops. We had missionaries sent home from the entire world in 2 weeks. 2 weeks that had never, ever even crossed any of our minds. And we're seeing the effects of, I don't know about you, but I've lost family members in the last month, family members. I lost my beloved older sister. I've lost a stepmom. I've lost cousins. I've lost clients and friends. I mean, if you haven't noticed, there's a very strong increase in mortality going on in our world. And cancers are up by like 400%. Mortality's up by over 200% from the 25 to 45-year-old demographic globally. Now, I was in the insurance business for 30 years. people in their 20s and people on a group insurance plan never died. The odds of collecting on group insurance was almost nil before you were 50 years old. But the insurance companies are experiencing multi-billion-dollar losses compared to their actuarial studies because of the last 3 years. So call it what you might. The reality is, I believe it's evil and conspiring men, and I think the scriptures talk about that.
So let me go to the elephant in the room, so to speak, that whenever this conversation comes up, I remember, within a few months after everything had broken out, I think I even did an episode, one of the 1 or 2 episodes I ever did on COVID, but talking about, look, this is a little ridiculous that people think that this is not coming from the lab, right? It's like this is the Wuhan virus is from the Wuhan Lab. It's pretty obvious. I mean, if you recall, one of the very first videos that ever got put out there, I don't know if it got shut down or not, was someone, I think he was a doctor or a researcher at the Chinese facility in Wuhan, and he contracted the virus, and he was trying to warn everybody about what had been released, and he was scared to death about it. I don't know what happened to him, but it was the first thing I ever saw of anybody from China actually saying something, and it was pretty obvious. I remember also right before that I had seen an ABC, but this is the Australian broadcast company, put out something about wet markets and how these things happen and how the wet markets create these problems. Even SARS, which David Martineau, I remember, said something about SARS also, about this, about not being necessarily a wet market. But it was obvious, right? And every month it became more and more obvious that this had leaked out of the lab. There are still people that believe that this did not leak out of the lab, even after confirming, even a number of the major news networks are now confirming that this likely came out of the lab. But here's the question from that, again, is, and this is obviously opinion from any of us, but was it on purpose?
Yes.
Yes, you're okay.
Absolutely.
Why would it be on purpose? And this is the other odd thing, is you do have American, let's call them officials like a Fauci, that are directly involved with the Wuhan research in the what is the term about gain? Is it gain of function?
Gain of function.
Gain of function that they're trying to accomplish with duplicating and manipulating the coronavirus, which is odd. Why would you put in, and here people can say, Greg, you're spreading conspiracy theories. Here's just a simple question. Why is Fauci, who has a massive economic interest in this, why would he be the one you put out as the spokesperson? That I never understood that. How ridiculous is that? That if you did that in any other industry, in any other way, people would discount him immediately and cry for his removal.
You want the breaking news?
Sure.
Fauci was the young doctor in the Reagan administration that engineered Reagan signing the pharmaceuticals not having any financial liability for vaccines. Fauci has a 40-plus year history of being the architect behind the scenes as the person for the big companies and their profits and the control. See, think about it. What was the war in heaven about? The fight over agency, and we wanted to come to earth and learn and grow. So the fight for agency has existed for a very, very long time. What happened the most during the last 3 years? How was our agency? Did we have the choice? Do we have the choice to go with our dying father or grandmother and go in the hospital? Did we have a choice on whether they would receive a Nobel Prize over-the-counter safe nutraceutical that costs a few bucks, or that they had to go into a protocol that had failed in its approvals in Africa and 50% of the people died from the drug that they gave most people when they got in the hospital, and 97 or whatever percent of the people died when they put them on the ventilator, when their oxygen depleted. And the ironic part of all this, Greg, is guess what the virus attacked? And this is in the patent. It attacked the endothelial lining, the endothelial cell. And because you're so knowledgeable about nitric oxide and how it helps heal the lining of the artery, I find it ironic. I find it almost providential. The nitric oxide was awarded the Nobel Prize. At the same time, patents were given to evil and designing people to have a virus that attacks that very lining, that attacks the endothelial lining. Where do you think when you hear of people, they go, why did that 25-year-old soccer player die? Well, he had 10,000 microclots in his body. Why would he have 10,000 microclots? People don't have microclots because you're attacking the endothelial lining and creating microclots and creating bigger clots. And that's why we now have, I think, the largest cause of death in the country, in the world, sudden adult death syndrome, SADS, unexplained, died in their sleep. 52-year-old died in their sleep. 45-year-old dropped over dead, having a heart attack. 18-year-old basketball player has a massive myocarditis type of problem. It's because, and all of these are in the patents. Surprise, they're in patents that are sometimes over 20 years old, all the way down. And even as like 5-6 years ago, the head of one of the major universities, which is Fauci's partners and high funding of the National Institute of Health, they were receiving the money, and they were the people working with Wuhan, even years after. And there is emails and there's documents proving their communications. All of that is in the David Martin research and everything else, talking about that they were banned from doing gain of function, and they kept on doing it anyway. They kept on doing it anyway. And how much money has changed hands in the world? How much wealth has been transferred from people, insurance companies, governments in the last couple of years? What has happened to our currency? We virtually ruined we were paying hospitals to diagnose things with a virus. We were paying them to give a protocol on a virus that had proven to be not successful. We were paying them to put them on a machine that was blowing up their lungs because their microclots were so bad. These were all the things we were doing, and the hospitals were making bank, and the companies providing all the protocols made billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars. And why we would trust them as being, these major companies, many of them have been fined billions and billions of dollars over the last 30 years for killing people with things that weren't safely tested, that didn't work. And then we're doing it again. And we're supposed to just sit back and say, well, the guy in the white coat or the guy with the stethoscope or the guy who's got a PhD is telling us it's okay, so I guess we should do it.
But certainly not all doctors are in on some type of this type of conspiracy on this.
Of course
and they're
not. Of course
not. So why then are they agreeing with it? Why would they agree with it? I've got doctor friends that were very pro-vaccine, right? Very pro-vaccine. Of course, right. They're in an environment. I've got one friend that runs hospitals and has an ER background, and they're overloaded. They're overloaded. So from their point of view, they're looking at this. They're seeing people, they can't breathe. They're dying. It's a small percentage doing the best of people, but that's what they're surrounded by.
No question. No question. In fact, another good friend of mine, Dr. John Witcher, he was just a good old boy country doctor in Mississippi, just tried to run for governor. He lost his job. He was fired because he was giving people that was getting people things well. He was giving them hydrochloroquine and ivermectin and zinc and magnesium and those types of things. They were getting well. They forbade him to do it as the doctor, the administrators, under direction often from their government. The governments have been a part of this. The person you mentioned in charge of this, he visited with our governor two governors during that area and basically said, hey, here's the program, guys. I know that from interesting sources. Either you follow or you lose your funding at your medical schools. You lose your funding from the national agencies. You lose your funding. So why did a lot of them go along with it? One, they didn't do their own homework. But second, I believe a lot of them did. They didn't want to lose their job. Who wants to lose their job? And so they went along, even though they may have suspected that things weren't going very well, or that they were told that if they did anything outside of the norm prescribed national protocol, which was not successful, in my opinion, that they'd lose their job and lose their career. And they're I know I have met in the last couple of years, hundreds, if not thousands, pilots, nurses, doctors, healthcare workers, et cetera, that all walked away from their jobs because they felt like that they were not following what they were trained to do and what their oath of their profession was.
So, okay, so that's down at the lower levels. What about the higher levels, though? How would something like this happen? I mean, because what you're talking about would be a conspiracy at a global, the magnitude of that would just be immense. And typically you would think that there would be some, especially in the US, some types of checks and balances that would see these types of things and say, whoa, back off. We see what's going on here. How would you get past any of those barriers?
Have you heard of the United Nations? Have you heard of the World Health Organization?
But how much do we really follow those things? It always seems to me that, because I hear that a lot, but I think there's more and more involvement over the years, but I feel like we typically don't adhere to most of those things. You're talking about usually, third world countries, maybe some of Europe. How much does the U.S. really follow those kind of guidelines?
Well, right now there's a resolution of the World Health Organization that gives them sovereignty over our choices as a government on healthcare.
But do those things pass? I mean, they would have to pass in the U.S.
Well, again, when you're a part of an organization globally, we're dealing with a global power play and a global criminality, a global Gadianton group. I mean, think about it. I mean, Greg, again, and this is way complex, and I'm probably not even equipped well enough to explain, but look at the history of the Federal Reserve and the dollar. You can read Edward Griffin's book, another personal friend of mine from, the creature from Jekyll Island, which talks about the entire Federal Reserve and how all of that came apart. There's an interesting new book just came out by some people in Utah talking about our connection, unfortunately, as a church to the Federal Reserve as well on the financial side. The major players in the financial side, in many cases, were in the establishment of our community and our church were First Security Bank, the Eccles family, pretty prominent. Mariner Eccles was one of the first presidents of the Federal Reserve. He was right in the middle of it all. Fiat currency, getting off the gold standard. Everyone knows what's happened the last year. We've lost 20% of our value, purchasing power, et cetera. The BRICS countries are now going to take away our leverage that we've had for a number of years on being the only currency you could exchange for gasoline and oil, and that's going to perhaps undermine it. So, I mean, I get newsletters every day saying, look out, your money's not going to be worth anything in the bank. You're going to be confiscated. We're going to be going to a digital dollar so they can control everything you do. I mean, we couldn't travel. We couldn't go certain places. We had people getting in fist fights at a fast food restaurant if they stood within 2 feet of someone instead of 6 feet apart. Do the research somewhere on 6 feet apart. There is none. There is none. It's nonsense. The same thing with now, don't you find it, maybe I see this every day, but the FDA just came out in the last 2 weeks saying, doctors can prescribe ivermectin now. Well, how freaking convenient that now they can use ivermectin again. But for the last couple of years, they would have lost their jobs, giving people something that had been tested with billions of people, and it was portrayed by the media as horse deworming, horse paste. That's that is the biggest smear propaganda slam job ever. But if you watch what's happened, they're now all changing the story, and they're now all moving us into the next phase. And my heart is broken for the people of Maui, but it's almost like, my goodness, well, what tragedy can now divert us from where we're going? What tragedy can divert us from the corruption going on in our current Oval Office's family and the bribery, the specific check money that's being exchanged? We have a former president now who's been, indicted 5 times in the last, 45 days. I mean, we are really in perilous times, and frankly, everyone needs to wake up and get involved. Everyone needs to be mini Captain Moroni's and stand up for truth in their homes, in their neighborhoods. Go out and fight the school boards that are preaching woke transgenderism. Greg, think about it. 5 years ago, if I'd have said that we'd have a country that was embracing transgenderism and mutilation of children under 16 without the parents' results, and the politicians in states are passing laws saying that you can do that,
that's insane.
we would have thought
insane.
that we'd all have lost our minds. And so, but what happens is, just like the boiling frog in the water, as we just sit along and do our thing, eventually, before we know it, we're boiled alive. And I'm not trying to be an alarmist. I've tried to offer for the last 10 years hope in protecting the body, protecting against these things, because as you know, with your experience with nitric oxide and vitamin D and everything else, you're feeling better. You're not as dependent on your medications and those types of things. You're seeing that you have energy and vitality. This government, I believe, the Gadayatans of this government, so not every government worker, I'm not against medical science. I believe in medicine. I just believe it's now being controlled by pharmaceutical interests. And that's the problem. And I believe in the individual's right to their own treatment, their own choice. I believe that's a fundamental right, an inalienable right from the Constitution, that it's not to be compromised. And I think we've given that up. And just like passports they want to restrict who can travel, they want to restrict who can buy food, they want to restrict what medicines you can buy. How more adversarial could we get than what Satan proposed in the pre-existence? Then he wanted to control everything. That's what's happening, I believe, and I think we have to resist it as long as we can.
All right, John, really appreciate your time. I love listening to what you have to say. It gives me a lot to think about. I'm going to, again, throw a shout out to Cardio Miracle. Again, this is something I take every single day. It has made a massive difference in how I feel, and some measurable things for me that has really made a difference for me. So, John, thanks so much for your time, and we'll have you back again.
Thanks, Greg. Well, let's talk the evangelical movement. There's a lot of great things that we're doing in Cardio Miracle with our evangelical friends in bridging the gap. So that'll be fun enough. Thank you.
We'll bring that up next time. Thanks so much, John.
Thanks.